Hey everybody, welcome to this little ditty on propagating plants from seeds. I know many of you are members and there's a seed distribution going on and you're getting all these seeds, and maybe you've never planted seeds before in your own landscape, or you're not exactly sure what to do. This isn't about, buying a package of tomato seeds and bringing them home from the grocery store or from the garden center. This is about maybe receiving seeds from the arboretum, or better yet, how about go out and collect seeds yourself in the landscape? Maybe even at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, grab some seeds. And of course, this is a little primer for what do we need to do. And so to begin with, we're gonna look right here at this little PowerPoint I put together, and then we're gonna come around and I'll show you some things in real life or face to face. So propagating plants from seed. First of all, you might say, well, why seeds? I mean, come on. I mean, I'd rather take cuttings, or I'd rather just buy a plant. Well, look at the list here. If you plant plants and you grow plants from seed, you are promoting biological diversity. And right now, biodiversity is a hot topic. The more you can mix up the genetic information in your garden and in the ecosystem, the more powerful, the more resilient, and the better ability that ecosystem has to adjust to the changing climate. Not only that, but seed propagation, that's pretty inexpensive. Even seeds aren't that expensive, and collecting your own, shoot, that's just your time. It's easy once you get to know the process. I don't know about you, but for me, it's a whole lot of fun. And seeds are often free. How about that? And seeds are great to share because you can put a whole grove of trees in your pocket, bring it to a meeting, and hand that to somebody else. So first of all, what is a seed? Very simply, a seed is a miniature plant surrounded by a protective covering called a seed coat. In fact, in that seed, there's a root, a stem, and leaves. And so it's a whole plant, and in fact, a whole plant in miniature, if you will, and that seed coat protects it, gives it longevity when it's not actually in the ground. My definition of seed, simply a plant in a nutshell, okay? That's my approach to humor right there. It's a dad joke. My grandkids say it's a granddad joke. Nonetheless, we're talking about a whole plant in miniature that gives you a lot of leeway there. Now, when it comes to growing plants from seed, I'd be remiss if I just didn't talk a little bit about the idea of how do we get seeds to grow? What do seeds need to germinate? Okay, what's required for successful germination? Well, first and foremost, you need media. Okay, some type of soil or potting mix. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about that. If you've never planted seeds before and you're like, what kind of media do I use? Okay, that's going to provide anchorage. It's going to provide water and oxygen to that root system. Okay, and oxygen is just as important as water, and that's why it's important that we pick a medium that is well oxygenated and very porous. Secondly, we need moisture, so we need a medium that's going to hold that moisture. Okay, because it's the moisture that drives the germination. Okay, when the moisture gets imbibed or absorbed, that's going to stimulate. Okay, but it won't stimulate it unless it's warm enough, so we need warmth. Okay, there's a certain degree of temperature that's important for seeds to be stimulated to germinate. And last but not least is light. And I'm not talking about the light that drives photosynthesis. Sometimes seeds need to be close to the soil surface so that exposure to light, and specifically the red light in the spectrum, is going to oftentimes cause certain seeds to germinate. For a lot of us, it ends up being those weed seeds. So we're out weeding our garden and we cultivate, we bring those seeds up to the surface. They've got everything they need to germinate. Now you just gave them light and off they go. That's different than the photosynthetic light that's going to drive that seedling to produce more leaves, stems, flowers, fruits, and seeds. Now, people always ask me about potting media. What do I use for growing seeds? And if you go to the store, you'll see Miracle-Gro sells a seed starting potting mix. Lots of different companies sell potting mixes. I really don't recommend using them because they're very expensive compared to a typical potting mix or potting soil. So think about this. When it comes to potting soil, just buy a reputable, pasteurized potting soil. Okay, it's important. Potting soils typically have about 85% airspace, okay, pore space, and that's going to end up being filled with water and air. Seed mixes tend to be a little bit more aerified, and so we just need to make sure that we're using a professional potting mix, one that's a bag, it's sealed, it's pasteurized, no weed seeds, no competition. And then we water correctly, and that would be water from the top, let the water saturate through and come out the drainage holes in the bottom. Now, important seed terms. Seed germination, that's when the embryo sucks up water, begins to put out a root, a radical we call it, then shoots and leaves. That's germination, okay? Seed viability is a term we use to describe when seeds germinate and grow normally. You see, seeds can be alive, but if they don't have enough stored sugar, they're not going to grow normally. And so they'd be alive, but they wouldn't be viable. And lastly, seed longevity, how long a seed's going to remain viable, because seeds are constantly respiring. And as a result, they're going to lose viability over time. And so we need to slow down that process. I got a little trick for that right here in a minute. Seed longevity, okay? Factors that affect seed longevity. First and foremost, kinds of plants, seeds that you have. Woody plant seeds, longevities maybe 3 to 5 years. Okay, annuals and perennials, maybe 1 to 3 years. Vegetable seeds, maybe a year. Okay, so species plays a big role. But how you treat your seeds once you get them is certainly going to influence their longevity. And the best storage conditions for seeds to promote their longevity, to increase and keep their longevity long, is somewhere where it's 30 to 40% relative humidity and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I don't know about you, but I got one of those in my kitchen. It's called the refrigerator. Now, folks, don't put the seeds in the freezer, because then you'll be freezing your seeds. No, just put them in the refrigerator. All right, my wife and I have an agreement where I get a little bit of one little space in the refrigerator. You can see there on the right-hand side of that drawer where I have seeds that I'm storing, okay? They can be tropical, subtropical, temperate plant seeds. To store them, that 40-degree temperature is ideal. And here you can see I've got a number of different seeds being stored and also being treated in different ways. Speaking of being treated in different ways, some of you may have selected seeds from the seed distribution of plants that are woody, plants that are perennial, and those temperate plants, plants that withstand a freezing and below in the wintertime, may require or may have what we call a dormancy period. And if we're collecting seeds, we need to know how to treat those seeds to break or meet those dormancy requirements. So very quickly, 2 kinds of dormancy in temperate plant seeds, all right? One's a physical dormancy. What does that mean? Well, you see it right there on the screen. Seed coat is so impervious to water that water can't get in. If water could get in, the seed would germinate. That's a physical dormancy. So we'll talk about how you go about meeting that need or breaking that physical dormancy. Now, that's not to be confused with physiological dormancy, which is a biochemical dormancy. Now, even though the water can get in, the seed still doesn't germinate. Case in point, maples. Maples have a physiological dormancy. And so there's an inhibitor. There are chemicals in the seed that prevent it from germinating, even though it's warm and they've imbibed water. It's got to go through a dormancy period, and we can take care of that ourselves and legislate it by meeting those dormancy requirement needs. Physical dormancy. How do physically dormant seeds meet their dormancy requirement in nature? Well, we have natural weathering, we have freezing, thawing, animal eats the seed and it goes through their digestive system, rain. So basically what's happening is the seed coat is becoming compromised so water can get in. Sometimes that takes a year, or sometimes that takes a winter, sometimes it takes longer. But if we're gonna do it, we can do this thing called scarification. We become the natural weathering. We take the seeds and we scarify them. How do we scarify them? 3 methods. I don't recommend the third. First one is mechanical. That's where you use a file or a knife or something to scrape that seed to make it able to absorb water. The second is hot water treatment. Y'all, this is the easiest. You can put a bunch of seeds in a bowl, boil some water, let it cool for a minute or 2, and then take that hot water, put it in the bowl and let them soak for a day, 12 to 24 hours. And then immediately after you finish doing the hot water treatment, you plant those seeds. You can scarify a lot of seeds, small seeds. You don't need to worry about cutting your finger with a knife or a file. Sulfuric acid, that's for the professionals, not for me. I'd like to keep my clothing on my body and not have it disappear before my eyes. So here are some photographs of different ways that seeds can be scarified. You can use sandpaper, a file, pair of nail clippers, okay? Or even a pair of pruners, a knife if you have seeds that are big enough, but the hot water treatment really gets my recommendation. And here you can see I'm scarifying some seeds that I collected right here from the Arboretum called Mexican Buckeye, and I'm scraping that seed, and you say, how far? Just enough so you can see the meat of the seed on the inside. Now, The last thing we're going to talk about is this thing called physiological dormancy. How do remember, that's that dormancy where it's biochemical, it's inside the seed. So how do these seeds have their dormancy requirement met? Well, they're exposed to different temperature and moisture regimes from the time that the seeds ripen on the tree or the shrub to the time that they're ready to germinate. And typically they experience 3 different regimes. A warm, dry regime, that's when they're on the tree getting ready to fall off. A cold, moist regime, that's when they've fallen on the ground and winter comes, followed by a warm, moist regime, which is that's when they begin to germinate. And so when we do it, we call it stratification. Strata layer different regimes of temperature and moisture. You can see dogwoods, both Kusa and our native dogwood are definitely requiring have a physiological dormancy and require stratification. So home stratification, there's that refrigerator again, process where seeds are exposed to the following environment. 60 to 90 days in moist media at temperatures between about 33 and 41. So that same drawer that I store my seeds in is the same drawer in my refrigerator that I'm stratifying my seeds. Does that make sense? Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I like to use a sandwich bag, okay, or a freezer bag, okay? I'm not going to use a brand name, but everybody calls them Ziploc bags, but a polyethylene bag, okay? And polyethylene is important because that allows for gases to be exchanged, but it holds moisture, it retains moisture. And so I will put that same potting soil, I'm going to germinate my seeds. I'll put it in a bag, but I'll make sure it's moist before I put it in there. Not dripping wet, but moist. Then I'll take my seeds, and typically for stratification, I like to soak my seeds for a day, and then I'll put them into that bag and I'll mix them up. I'll show you, I've got some real life examples here I'll show you in a second. And zip up the bag, and into the refrigerator it goes. And depending on how many days are recommended for stratification, I'll leave them in there that long. Typically, everyone, it's 60 to 90 days. All right. So if let's say ginkgo, for instance, literature says ginkgo is 60 days stratification. If I put mine in and 90 days later I pull them out to plant them, not a problem. Okay. So it's only if you short side that stratification that you're going to have issues. Okay. But it's going to range between 60 and 90. Some species, 120 days. Okay. That's what? Let's see. That's 4 months of stratification. So that's important. Some people like to stratify their seeds in the pots where the seeds are going to germinate, although you need a bigger refrigerator, and you can see that slide in the bottom right for that. So it's time to get propagating. But guys, before we get propagating, some of you may be asking, how do I know if a plant that I got from the Arboretum seeds, or if I collect plants for a tree, how do I know what the dormancy requirement is? There's a great website, all right? It's called SheffieldSeed.com. It's a seed company that sells seed. And when you go to that website, it looks a little bit like this. And then let's say you want to know about the dormancy requirement of Cornus capitata angustata seeds. All right, here's that information page. It tells you all about the seeds, what they look like. And then if you scroll down, look at that. Scarification, soak in water, let stand for 24 hours, followed by stratification, cold stratify for 90 days, germinate, sow seed, 3/8 inch deep, tamp the soil, mulch the seed bed. So Sheffields.com is a nice way without having to spend money to get lots of information about the dormancy requirements of seeds that you might have that you're concerned about. Okay, here I am at my little propagating table. And what I want to do is emphasize some things I talked about, maybe illustrate some things I talked about through the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's start with equipment. Okay, it's really important that you remember I talked about polyethylene bags. And so what I have right here are sandwich size and freezer size. Both work very well when it comes to storing seeds, but also when it comes to stratification. Okay, now guys, remember this. When you stratify seeds, when their stratification period is up, let's say 90 days, okay, then it would be time to go ahead and plant them. When you scarify seeds, let's say you collect seeds in October or November, don't scarify them. just store them whole, like you harvested them, and then the week that you're getting ready to go ahead and plant those seeds, then it would be time to scarify. So scarify, soak the seeds for 24 hours, and then immediately plant. Okay, you just don't scarify in advance, because then those seeds are going to just dry out, which is very important. So that's important. Here's the other thing that's incredibly important. I like plant labels and pens that don't wash off in the rain. So guys, you got to label everything. If you're storing seeds, take a look here. I've got some seeds stored in this gelato container. All right, people give me a hard time because I like Talenti gelato, but the containers are great for storing seeds and lots of other horticultural things. But I've got some dogwood seeds inside this Talenti's container. But look what I've got. I've got a label. And the label not only tells me what the plant is, Cornus cusa angustata, also known as Cornus elliptica, but I also put on there collected 9/20/25. So this tells me when I collected the seeds. I've put a little paper towel in the bottom of the seed holder, the container, as a way to take up any excess moisture. Remember, y'all, this is for storage, Another way you can store seeds is in these little tiny Ziploc bags that you can order online. And once again, there's Cornus cusa, not Cornus elliptica, collected 9/20/2025. And then in this case, I've got a little thing on the back. It says 65 seeds. So I know exactly how many I'm dealing with there. Guys, you got to think about where you're going to put these seeds. Store them in those bags. A little paper towel in there for storage is kind of like, it's a good way to keep excess moisture from causing any fungi or any rot going on. Okay, so that's really important. Okay, so let's fast forward. I'm going to plant these seeds. Okay, if you're buying seeds that are in a packet, follow the instructions. Okay, one thing you want to always remember, most seeds fail in germination because it's too wet and too dark. And what I mean when I say too dark, I'm talking about we tend to want to plant our seeds too deep, and as a result, they can't germinate. And it's too dark. They need light that'll stimulate their germination along with the moisture and the oxygen that's going to be there when the seed starts to germinate. So if you're going to make a mistake, plant your seeds too shallow, not too deep. All right? Now, potting soil. I didn't bring my own bag. I just brought my own bucket. And a good, reputable potting soil is going to be a mixture of peat moss, pine bark, perlite. It's a soilless media, and it's engineered to have about 85% pore space. Now, I said that twice because I really want you to remember that, okay? And so this is going to provide plenty of oxygen once those seeds start to germinate, but also good moisture holding capacity between the peat moss and the pine bark, okay? Sometimes they'll use coconut coir in there as well to add a little bit more moisture holding. We don't want it to be too moist. And people always ask me, what brand do you use? I use the one that's the least expensive, the most available, and the most preferable. Use one that's within your budget. It's got to be sealed because good potting soils are pasteurized, and that takes care of all the nasties that could do your seeds in. Okay, now pots. I brought 1, 2, 3 different sizes that I like to use when I plant my seeds, just based on the expected root spread and growth of the seed. Typically, I'll put some small trees, I'll put in this larger 6-inch container, use this little 4-inch for perennials and smaller plants, and even these come right from the Arboretum. Okay, no, I didn't take them from the Arboretum. I bought Arboretum plants, and in fact, I don't ever buy pots. I buy plants and then I keep the pots, all right? However, occasionally I do buy pots. This past season, I started growing, or I collected acorns from a white oak, and I needed a pot that was more slender and longer than it was wide, for that taproot that comes from the white oak. These were maybe 25 to 50 cents a piece. Not very expensive. They're very flimsy, all right? But I've got these all bunched together in a larger pot, plant my acorns in that. So you have to think about that. But here's the secret. If you notice, every single pot that I grow my seeds in have drainage holes. You've got to give that container, okay? You've got to give that soil column a place to get rid of excess moisture. Otherwise, the oxygen's not gonna work. So that becomes incredibly important. Now, I brought these because I wanted to show you. I took these out of the fridge today for this little video, all right? Here's my Ziploc bag. There's my potting soil inside. Cornus elliptica. It says 90-day stratification. So I've actually written on the bag the requirement, and then I wrote the day I threw it. I put it in the refrigerator, December 5th, 2025. So I can count out the date. In fact, I have the date on my calendar as to when these are going to be ready to plant. And I tried to time it so that it would be mid-March, okay, when it starts to get a little bit warmer and the soil starts to warm up a little bit. If we're having a cold spring, I'll just keep these in the fridge. And I'll just wait until a few weeks, let a few weeks go by and warm it up. Cold soil is a big culprit for why seeds don't often germinate. We tend to plant our seeds, especially if we're planting flowers, vegetables, annuals. We have to make sure that we plant those seeds according to the way it's instructed on the container. We always tend to do it a little bit earlier. Problem with that is it's not warm enough. You have all the other ingredients for good seed germination, and then what happens? They sit there and rot because it's not warm enough. So it's really important to if you're going to make a mistake, plant them a little bit late, then a little bit early. Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to open this up and show you the seeds. You can barely see them. And so I'm going to take a handful of soil and open it up. And you can see there they are. Now, you might be saying, have they germinated? Nope. They've turned a little bit more brown than when I collected them. And what's happening is they're having their dormancy requirement met. Typically, a moist soil like this is going to dilute the inhibitors inside the seed. And after that many days, you're going to have a situation where those seeds, when it gets warm and moist, those seeds are going to germinate. But these are Cornus elliptica, an evergreen dogwood. And I've got, I must have 75 or 80 seeds in here. My wife asked me, what are you going to do with all those seeds? I said, it doesn't matter. I'm going to plant them all and then I'll give them away. Talk about giving away. In this bag, I collected ginkgo biloba seeds, okay? Well, they were fruit and oh man, they stink, okay? But these came right off of NC State's campus. I've got maybe 100 of them in here, all right? And if we open it up, you'll see these seeds are really easy to see. Look how big that seed is. All right, well, the recommendation for those, Sheffield says 60 days, 60 days of stratification. So these on my bag says stratified 60 days, and the date is February 6th. So that gives me March 6th, April 6th. So perfect. Early April, plant the ginkgos, nice warm soil, and off they go. So, for example, let's plant some seeds, shall we? Okay, and since I'm going to be planting some ginkgo seeds and I'm going to get them to germinate and give them to Blake, let's start with that. So here's my 6-inch pot. Here's my potting soil. Okay, y'all, there's nothing secret about this. There's nothing unique about this. Just fill the pot with potting soil. Now, here's a couple of things to remember. Make sure the potting soil has already been moistened, all right? Because then it's going to be easier to water than if you put it in dry, all right? So I've moistened the potting soil. Do you notice I didn't push down on it? There it is, right like that, right to the surface. Now I'm going to go in and grab 2 of my stratified ginkgo seeds, all right? There they are. They're pretty good size. And what I read is, it said 3/8 of an inch, okay? That's not very deep. And I'm going to put them, take a look. I'm going to take them and lay them on the soil surface, like that. Then I'm just going to take my finger and push down just a little bit. All right, like that. And then I'm just going to take my finger and brush that soil over the top, like so. Now I've planted those seeds. See how easy that was? Notice that I planted them a good distance apart from one another so that I'll occupy space where they won't compete. Then I will water them until the water comes out of the bottom of the pot, and then put this in a warm, sunny place, right? And wait for magic to happen. Now, what about taking these seedlings? Can I plant them? Answer, yes. You can go ahead and plant them if you want, okay? My personal preference is for at least those woody plants that I plant in containers, I like to grow them for a year in the container, overwinter them, and then plant them the following year. Not only that, it gives me an opportunity to give some away. That's really the long and the short of it. Maybe too long, but you know, that's basically it. It's not rocket science, it's horticultural science, and it's pretty straightforward. Here's my last thing I'll say. This container was filled with Cornus elliptica seeds. I have 2 bags being stratified. What's the worst thing that could happen? None of them would germinate. That's the worst thing. Okay, so I'm out of plastic bag and some potting soil, all right? But the good news is I still have seeds I'm storing that I can do the treatment again. Try it. What have you got to lose? And especially with the seed distribution from the Arboretum, how cool, you get some neat seeds, try them. Off my first seed distribution from the Arboretum, they're still in a drawer in my office, right? Get out there and find out what they need. People always ask, is it too late to stratify if you get them in February, like right now, or March? Answer's no. You're just going to be delayed on the other end. Not a problem. But I urge you, everybody, go out there and plant some seeds.